Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to the first episode of our guest experience webinar series. Throughout this series, we're going to cover 4 key topics. First, how to create a culture of feedback in your business. Next, how to collect meaningful guest feedback, how to manage negative guest feedback, and how to use guest feedback to grow your business. So to kick off the series, we'll discuss why it's important to create a culture of feedback. We're going to talk about how to create an environment where feedback is safely shared, what expectations to set around routine feedback collection, where to focus your efforts based on guest feedback to grow your business, and what tools you can leverage to empower your team, taking the administrative work out of feedback collection. So first, we're going to talk about why is it so important to create a culture of feedback. I'm very excited to be joined by Chris, lead and product manager for the guest experience score for Roller. Chris, welcome. How are you today?
Hey, good. Thanks, Josh. I'm really keen to talk about creating a culture of positive guest feedback and how venues can improve the experience through collecting and using effectively guest feedback.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got a lot of ground to cover in this webinar as well as in the next 3 episodes as well. So to get this kicked off, Chris, can you just share just a couple of reasons why is it so important to create a culture of feedback?
Yeah, number one, which I think is probably most important, is to discover or to learn the blind spots that you've got. So one of the really interesting things to consider is that perception is reality. So our eyes adjust to what we're looking at, and your guests see their experience much differently than what you think they're experiencing, their experience at your venue. So, I've heard several times from managers that they don't need to hear feedback from their guests because they're on site and they can see the venue operating themselves. They know what the experience is like. However, if you know everything happening at your venue, or you think that you know what's happening at your venue, actually getting feedback from your guest perspective shows that their experience from their own lens. And that's the lens that matters most. You're likely to learn things that you may not have otherwise known or may not have otherwise been, exposed to. And in some cases, you'll hear feedback that you sort of disagree with, but it still needs to be dealt with accordingly, because at the end of the day, the guest's feedback and the guest's perception is what's going to be determining them coming back or not how you felt like they should have experienced it, which is often difficult to sort of come to terms with. The other reason why creating a culture of feedback is important is a strong feedback culture typically has a strong relationship with guests. So when you hear praise from that feedback, it allows you to build loyalty through your advocates, providing positive feedback. And that's where the experience can get really personal. So particularly because direct service encounters with your staff often lead to the highest levels of guest satisfaction. Letting them know how you'll be recognizing the staff members involved makes it even more worthwhile for the guests to have provided you with that feedback. And so that actually encourages the guests to provide you with feedback because they know that culturally it's ingrained and it's going to actually be taken back and used. On the flip side, with negative feedback, responding to negative feedback is critical to strengthening the relationship with guests, and in many cases, repairing the relationship with your guests. Recovering from, call them service failures, allows you to learn about guests and learn about what's making guests unhappy that you may not have known about. Studies have shown that less than 4% of people with a complaint speak up, which means that when you show your appreciation for guests and you encourage positive guest feedback, even when guests complain, it's extremely valuable to the resolution process and building that relationship with that guest.
Yeah, 100%. Very well said there. Absolutely. So the other thing too about the importance of creating that culture of feedback has to do with guests' expectations. And the thing is, guests' expectations have changed and are consistently changing, and they're only going up. I don't think guests' expectations are going to be going down anytime soon. On the screen right here, there are a few stats that we think are important to share, and this just has to do with the booking experience, has to do with the experience itself, and it has to do with, I would say, the personalization and the culture that they experience when they come visit a leisure venue. First is 97% of consumers have abandoned a purchase because it wasn't convenient enough. Now, let's tie that in, Chris, with what you just said of less than 4% of people who have a complaint will actually speak up, which means if, let's say, you're going online and you try to do something and it's just too difficult, it's just not very convenient, are you going to call up that venue and call up that location and say, hey, just letting you know, I was going to come visit you, I was going to buy a ticket, but it wasn't convenient enough, so I'm not going to? No, you just go do something else. It's not worth your time. If it's not convenient to make that purchase, then it's not convenient to actually provide that feedback about how inconvenient it was to make the purchase. So that's one stat right there. Another one here that you see in the middle towards the bottom here is 1 in every 3 consumers will walk away from a brand they love after just one bad experience. So that's pretty powerful here too. In the same way, we're constantly trying to breed loyalty, but we know that loyalty is very fragile. We know that we cannot take our guests for granted, even if they're members, if they have annual passes, season passes, whatever it is, that can break anytime if they have a poor experience. And then the final one right here is 73% of customers expect a company to understand their unique needs and expectations. So when we think about what expectations are, now part of that is how they understand our expectations. So it's a little meta right there. It's kind of expectations on expectations themselves, but it's something we really need to be thinking about, something that we really need to consider. Some other information that we think is really important to share too, it has to do with some data that we found as far as what people value most in their customer experience. And so if we look towards the left here, kind of towards the bottom, are things that have maybe less of an importance from the customer experience, as well as we go up, we see the things that are worth paying for. So we really want to pay attention to everything that's up and to the right in this particular chart right here. So in particular, efficiency really seems to be the biggest one that came out of this study right here, as far as what people want, what people value most in their experience, as well as what they'll actually pay for. So efficiency, convenience, knowledgeable service, easy payment, friendly staff. These aren't just fluffy things that are afterthoughts. These aren't just, hey, we'll do this when we have time, when we have the resource. That this right here needs to be absolutely critically woven into your business model. When we think about the way the guests' expectations have changed, we can look at other businesses that are outside the attractions industry that you might not necessarily think of yourself as competing against. So, for instance, Netflix, Uber, Amazon, people are not necessarily thinking of themselves as competing with those businesses in the attraction space, but they have absolutely reset the expectations for their customers and therefore for your guests. So because of how the world is changing around us, the changes in our normal habits transcend industries into how people expect the experience to be at your attraction. One other really important component here that we want to discuss is about how feedback is essential to growth and innovation. When we talk about growth and we talk about really building momentum and organic growth, the best way that we can describe it is what you see on the screen right here. And we call this the guest experience flywheel. So this can very much be used as a framework for growing your business through the guest experience. When each of these 5 sections are working in tandem with one another, the flywheel spins faster, leading to further organic growth. So attract, this is your marketing, this is awareness, this is how guests are becoming aware of your business. The engage phase is when they're actually making that purchase and really amplifying that demand to visit. Deliver, that's where the actual experience happens between arrival and departure. These are your service interactions, they're your wow moments, they're perhaps some service recovery moments that you have to do if, let's say, the experience starts to slip. And then if the experience is so powerful in the deliver phase, you can get them to become a return visitor, hopefully a member, hopefully get them to be a recurring payment type of guest, right? They've got that membership, they've got those continual visits coming. And then the final one here is advocate. And when they advocate for your business, this now makes it easier to attract new guests because you are growing through the experience. People are posting positive online reviews, they're sharing positive word of mouth, they are telling other people you need to go, all because of everything they experienced in the previous 4 steps. Now, friction is what slows down the flywheel. And when you start to lose momentum in your business. So for instance, a guest experiencing a service failure that is not resolved will result in that guest being not a return visitor, right? In most cases. And they will probably not be an advocate either if they had a poor experience. So guests sharing the negative word of mouth slows the flywheel even faster than positive experiences that make the flywheel spin faster. So what this means is that potential guests aren't visiting and losing guests who won't return, particularly through negative word of mouth. So this puts more pressure on your marketing efforts when looking to attract guests back at the top of the flywheel. And of course, delivering a superior experience that leads to positive word of mouth then makes it easier to attract new guests because more people will have heard about the positive experiences. Back over to you, Chris.
Yeah, awesome. So let's talk about how to empower your team and actually receive feedback and start to put that culture of feedback in place. So starting with your feedback strategy, you should have a strategy for collecting feedback, and you should be balancing private and public channels. So private being internal reviews, talking with your customers, public channels being your Google, Facebook, TripAdvisor, those different things. Many venues will push all guests towards online review sites or those public channels as their primary source of feedback and advocacy. While this gives them the information they need, you're also sort of running the risk of publicizing negative experiences. Where those negative experiences are held, if all guest feedback is pushed towards public channels and online review sites, you're risking that information getting out there. Instead, focus on segmenting your guests into detractors and promoters, and then driving those detractors and promoters through the relevant channels. So detractors, you probably want that to be more in your private channel, and promoters makes more sense to drive through your public channels. Your first line of feedback collection should therefore be through private channels, such as the guest experience score, for example. And that what that first line of feedback will do is it'll actually determine how satisfied your guests are. Then for positive feedback, you can push your satisfied guests to those public or online review channels once they're, you can already be safe to know that they're a promoter and they're going to advocate for you. And for negative experiences or those detractors, when those guests are complaining, you want to be switching to your recovery mode. You want to resolve those failures. You want that channel to stay private in that first line without it going public. You should be encouraging your staff to embrace that feedback as well. A lot of organizations and just people, they want to avoid complaints, negative feedback, and that's really a dangerous mindset. It feels really safe and protected, but those complaints are actually what's going to help you grow. They're going to make you make better decisions, innovate, and be delivering a better guest experiences. Those complaints help point out areas of operation that can be improved for future guests. So therefore, you're reducing that friction of the flywheel for every new guest that's coming into your venue and leaving. They don't have that friction and they'll be more likely to advocate. So for that reason, it's really important. I encourage everybody to seek out complaints, at every opportunity, really embrace the complaint, even small ones, because if you can resolve them, particularly small ones that can be resolved easily, it can impact your overall guest experience, guest sentiment, and start to really make that flywheel spin.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. So Chris, what expectations would you recommend for setting around routine feedback collection, particularly expectations for staff as well as expectations for guests?
Yeah, 100%. So expectations for staff. So staff, what you really want to do is you sort of want to lay down almost the ground rules, and you should let them all know that every single guest is going to be prompted for feedback. And that can seem like a scary thing, but it's actually also a really awesome and positive thing, because your staff members now have the opportunity to truly make a mark, a really great positive mark on that guest experience. And that positive experience that the staff member is directly impacting can be traced back to them. Additionally, because that feedback can be traced back to the staff members, those staff should be aware that guest feedback is a driving source of change. We're happy to collect it. We are embracing that the complaint. All the positive feedback is going to be celebrated, and we're actually going to make changes based on negative feedback. Staff members should be encouraged to encourage guests to speak up, share their opinions, share their mind. So that way you can start to get that guest feedback coming through, and you can make some awesome changes. And that sort of like segues into the expectations for guests. Guests need to know that their feedback is valued. They're not speaking into the void. You are going to listen to what they say. You do care about what they say. And by actually following up on that and responding swiftly, the guest sees that you appreciate their concerns. When it comes to actions, guests should be given ideally a broad idea of what's going to be done with that feedback. For example, documenting so that the heads of the department are aware, can take action, or if you've got, if it's a really, I suppose, a minor problem and you've got a solution, you can just basically solve it for them on the spot. But when asking guests for feedback, guests should know that you value their time. You don't want to waste a lot of it. So therefore, ideally your survey is quick and straightforward, not like a 50 question with open-ended questions, 50 question survey. So you don't want to overwhelm them. So ideally, if you sort of wrap all that up together, staff members are encouraging guests to voice their concerns. Guests have a really easy and convenient way to do that, which we know is really important, convenience. Guests feel heard, they feel valued, and they feel like there's going to be a solution when they are raising a complaint. And that's going to make them more likely to give you feedback in the future as well.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. So Chris, where would you recommend focusing efforts based on guest feedback to grow your business?
Yeah. So in order to accurately, identify areas of improvement, it's all about high volume and getting some significant data. So collecting high volumes of feedback, it gives you the power of quantifiable aggregated demand, which is a bit fancy, but at the end of the day, what it means is that you're actually painting a really good picture about what is going to make your guests happy and what feedback you need to be paying attention to. This levels out your feedback across a wider range of your guests, rather than potentially seeing smaller issues from a smaller portion of your guests, or issues that seem like they're really big, but it's actually a really tiny portion of your guests that are complaining about it, and so it's probably not the major issues that you need to be solving. When looking at the data that you actually collect, your biggest friction points should rise to the surface pretty straightforward, as they will more than likely gain the highest frequency of complaints, and those complaints will be more critical. One complaint, on the other hand, is exactly that. It's just one complaint. It doesn't need a major overhaul based on one guest, although that guest should obviously feel like their opinion is valid and valued, but you need to focus on the wider issues that are impacting most of your guests and causing the most problems. But if that one problem is a trend that starts to build, then that's when you need to take corrective action. So when you've sort of collected that quantifiable aggregated data, and you start to identify your larger friction points, that flywheel, when you're solving those friction points, the solution is not always the opposite of a problem. The key to making changes is to solve for the perception of the complaint instead of the complaint itself. That's really important. And that's often much more productive. I'll say it again because I think it's really important. The key to making changes is to solve for the perception of the complaint instead of the complaint itself. So, for example, say you receive a significant number of complaints that indicate that wait times are too long. The opposite of the problem is to just simply reduce the queues. But maybe you're already at max capacity, or these complaints arise during peak times of the year. Whether a wait time is long or short is a subjective perception. A half an hour wait for one guest may feel really long, but it might feel pretty reasonable for another guest because it's busy. Solving the perception would include ways that guests might feel like the time is passing by quicker, or that the time feels more valuable. So, for example, by putting in distractions in the queue, such as backstory or narratives with sound, games or mirrors, different things to do. That is going to start to solve the perception for both groups of people, and while solving that problem. Also, by providing an accurate estimated wait time, that could be another way that you could do it, and trying to overestimate slightly. And so what that actually will do is a bit sneaky, but it'll trick them into thinking that they sort of won out of that interaction. Their expectations will sort of be anchored based on that posted time, and you'll be beating their expectations, which is a good thing to do. These operational solutions impact your guest perceptions, and you'll find that these types of solutions focusing on the perception are much quicker to implement, and they'll solve the problems more effectively, and they may even be a lot more cost effective than completely changing how your business operates and is structured just to sort of solve a queue issue when you could have just simply put a mirror up.
Well said, exactly. And the key to making changes is to solve for the perception of the complaint instead of the complaint itself. I think that's one of the biggest takeaways from this webinar here. So Chris, thank you so much. What I'm excited now is we get to now see an interview with an existing customer using the GX score, talking about creating a culture of feedback. So Chris, thank you. And now let's get straight to that interview. Hey, Annalise, welcome to the webinar. How are you?
Fantastic. Thanks for having me, Josh. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure. Looking forward to chatting with you here. So to get this started, can you actually just tell us a little bit about Uptown Jungle, just so we have kind of an overarching view of the business?
Yes, most definitely. So Uptown Jungle started back in 2014 in Santee in California with one park, and now we have grown in 2022 to 9 parks spanning Arizona that has 6 parks, 2 in Nevada and 1 still in California. And Uptown Jungle is an indoor family entertainment center. We have trampolines, rock climbing walls, obstacle courses, tot area for specifically just 5 and under. And this is a really great place to bring your kiddos and have a lot of fun.
Excellent. Fantastic. So let's talk a little bit about kind of the importance of guest feedback and really being able to use that to drive several decisions within your business. So kind of starting at the top here, can you talk about a little bit of why it's important to create a culture of feedback and weaving that into the business model?
It's very important, not only from a guest perspective, but also from our team member perspective. So we always love to support feedback within our buildings with our team that then filters out into the guests. And the best way to get feedback is to ask for it. So with partnering with Roller and the GSX really allows us to support that culture of getting feedback, which then in turn allows you to grow, whether it's good feedback and you want to send out a thank you, or something that is more constructive that will allow you to fix something that maybe you didn't realize needs to be fixed. So having a good, strong culture of feedback is very important in order to grow and learn.
I like what you just said there. Of the best way to get feedback is to ask for it, right? There's, certainly there's definitely a subset of people that they're they will provide feedback. They are the reviewers, right? Wherever they go, whatever restaurant they eat at, they're posting that Yelp review, whatever it is. And then there's another, probably a much larger segment of people who don't leave feedback at all, right? It's not on their radar. They don't think about it. And you're really able to capture a lot of those simply by asking and simply by making it easy for them to provide feedback. I also like how you mentioned that it's important not just from the guest side, but also from the employee side as well. And sometimes it can be difficult for an employee to give feedback. They might fear that maybe they don't want to rock the boat, right? They don't want to, bring up any type of concerns that, might make their employer start to question their loyalty to the job or whatever. I know I'm going off on maybe some extreme tangent, but creating an environment where feedback is able to be safely shared.
Mm-hmm. It's very, very important. And you can't change something if you don't know. I always tell my team, I only know what I know. And that then filters to the guests too. If somebody leaves here upset, leaves one of our parks upset, and we don't know why, how can we fix it? So
yeah, if we don't know it, we can't fix it. That's something I learned many years ago when I was working in a guest communications department in a theme park, and we were collecting emails, letters, phone calls of just, we need all this guest feedback to be able to know what we need to fix, what we need to grow, to continually improve. So what about expectations to set around routine feedback collection? So can you talk about, we talked about the importance of creating that culture, but then really kind of getting into the mechanics of how you're able to really develop that and able to gain the feedback on a routine basis?
Well, we originally would just reach out to our guests randomly, or if they're in the park or one of our parks, and ask them. Or after parties, we would have a party survey. But now that we have GSX through the guest service experience through Roller, we're able to capture that immediate feedback when the guest comes into the park and they sign their waiver, and then they get a survey sent to them via email that allows them to give us immediate response to their experience in the park, whether it's exceptional, whether something needs to be cleaned or fixed, or they just have a comment maybe about how hot the park is. So the way that we capture it now is primarily through the GSX surveys through Roller.
Excellent. So how has that changed the landscape of feedback compared to kind of your previous methods of asking guests when they were in the park, or kind of just other methods of feedback collection?
Well, one, it's more immediate, it's more tangible, and it also allows us to collect it and keep it and refer back to it later as coaching. Maybe the person that received a positive comment isn't there that day that we need to review it, or we reviewed it. So we can go back and then review it with that team member and let them know what an exceptional job they did. The same thing for if there was a not so positive experience, so we need to go back and have a conversation with the team member. That information is there, it's stored, it's in Roller, and we're able to refer to it. It also gives us many categories that we can look at based on how we set up the survey and what we feel is important for our parks and our people to reflect on when they're giving excellent guest service, or if they need to improve on something. So it has many different components that allow us to really make sure we're diving into all the best aspects of guest service.
Yeah, absolutely. And really the importance of acknowledging those team members who were recognized, particularly as it was a positive experience, or coaching them if they fell below the expectation. And one of the things that, I've always found helpful is that if it comes from the guest and you have to coach a team member on perhaps maybe poorer service than what is expected of them or what they've done in the past, it removes a lot of the bias out of it and makes it very cut and dry, and it's direct. And I have found that it really eliminates a lot of the potential for argument or them challenging it afterwards, because whether the guest was right or wrong, this is what they observed and this is what they took with them. Can you talk a little bit about that as well?
Yeah, and it's interesting because I have had feedback just from my team members like, well, it's only one person, but with the benefit of Roller and these scores is that they might start with just maybe one guest having that comment, but as you go back and you take a lens to it, you can see that it actually is more than one guest having this experience. So now we have an issue that we really must deal with. So it's allowed us to look at things bigger picture and actually implement some really fun ways to make sure that our bathrooms actually look cleaner by maybe adding a plant or a picture, and increasing our time in between when we're cleaning the bathrooms from 30 minutes to 15 minutes because of these surveys that we've seen from the guests, or possibly not receiving a smile when they walk in the front door. That's huge. When somebody walks in, they want to be greeted with a smile. So if I am researching and looking through these surveys and I see a park or parks where guests are commenting that they didn't feel welcomed, I can have that conversation with the team members as well. So it really allows you to pinpoint specific areas within the park that might need some special attention, and then go back to it.
Yeah.
And then you can see your progress. It's really exciting to see your progress when you're maybe at a 70%, and then you speak to the park and the team members, and you go from a 70% to a 90% because they dealt with all of this. And we wouldn't know that otherwise if we didn't have the GSX. So
Right. So you see the scores, and when you initially get this, this is the baseline, and then you're able to really dive in and say, okay, well, this is actually, I would say, how do you ensure that the right data is rising to the surface? So you say, all right, if we want to increase the scores, this is what we need to focus on. This is what we need to coach our team on. And then, like you said, you're able to track that improvement over time to justify you're making those correct decisions.
Exactly. And it's really great. And then we're able to, shout out the team members of the parks that actually do make that difference. And you have that, like I said, tangible information right there in front of you that you can speak to. And like you mentioned, it means a little bit more when it's coming from the guests rather than the general manager or myself always saying, this isn't happening. But if other people that are visiting our parks are noticing the same thing, then it's like, okay. It's like when a parent tells a child to do something, it's different when a teacher tells a child. It actually sinks in a little better.
Right. Exactly.
So,
Good. It's a good comparison there.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of the overarching message and the takeaway here is that really perception is reality. And whether the team member was smiling or they were not smiling, if the team member thought that they were welcoming the guest and the guest sees otherwise, then maybe it doesn't mean that they're doing it wrong, they're doing a terrible job, but to pull back and say, all right, let's actually pick this apart. So why did the guest think that I was not welcoming when I felt that I was welcoming? Maybe there are some adjustments that I'm able to make. And it's not necessarily just about changing everything, but it's about adjusting the perception. So now the guest walks away thinking, all right, the restrooms are cleaner, the staff was more welcoming, all this, et cetera, and all these are measured. So
yeah, it's really great to have this tool and reflect on it 100%.
Good. I'm glad you feel that way. Excellent. This has been just such a fantastic conversation. I really appreciate your time today, and looking forward to chatting with you again sometime in the future.
Thank you so much. Same here, Josh. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks.
All right. Well, hey, everybody. Hope you enjoyed the presentation, the chat with Annalise, as well as the chat with Chris. Would love to open up to Q&A if this sparked any thoughts, any questions, any suggestions, perhaps anyone who's using the GX score or someone who might be considering it in terms of being able to really best manage your guest feedback. Excellent. And if there's not, that's fantastic as well. If anything does come up, feel free to reach out to any of us. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can email me, josh@rollerdigital.com. You can also visit roller.software/GX-score if you do want to learn more about the GX score. Looks like we do have. Here we go. Jen, thanks so much for submitting feedback here, for submitting a question. Jen says, for my locations with lower attendance numbers, I'm having a hard time getting respondents to my GX surveys. How do you recommend I encourage guests to increase these numbers? So I will, selected that I will answer it live. So I think that it goes away from there. So, my best thought here is, it does get to the guest automatically. So hopefully you're still getting a higher response rate than if you were relying on TripAdvisor or Google reviews to just kind of automatically generate that feedback. So I do imagine that that you're still getting that higher response rate. What you could do is incorporate this with the verbiage with your staff, particularly at the point of exit, to say, hey, you'll be getting a survey after the visit. If there are any concerns, first of all, you can let me know right now. Hopefully you'll rate your visit highly, but just be on the lookout for that. And if there is anything you think of after your visit, we would love to know. We'd love to know what we can do to improve. We'd love to know what we can do to better serve you on your next visit. Really just to kind of give the guests the opportunity to maybe get their gears turning after they visit. Particularly, if it's a complaint, if it's anything less than 5 stars, you really do want to. Hopefully, you can intercept that while they're still on site. So by the time they do get the GX score, it's 5 stars. They're talking about how great perhaps any complaint resolution may have been, and then give the opportunity to post online at that point. But if you can weave it in with the frontline staff are really engaged with how the GX score impacts the guest experience, then there's opportunities to talk about it with guests, particularly as their visit is coming to a close, to say you'll be getting this. Take a look, look out for it. And if you have any feedback, if you think of anything after you leave, then we look forward to reading it and addressing any feedback you provide us. So Jen, thanks so much for providing that. I appreciate that. Anything else? We still do have some time. I'm happy to hang out here if we need to. If anybody has any questions about the product itself too, it looks like Chris Leedon is in here. I can bring him on if there's any questions in particular to the actual GX score and the product functionality as well. He's definitely the mastermind behind it. Excellent. Well, if nothing else, and again, Jen, thank you so much for providing the question there. I hope my answer was helpful. And if you want to clarify or follow up on that, happy to chat after this as well. For any of you, feel free to reach out to us. And it looks like there's another one coming in. Oh, Jen just saying, yes, very helpful. Thank you. So fantastic. I really appreciate everyone being here. I hope this was helpful. I hope this helps to improve the way that you collect and manage guest feedback. And remember, there will be part 2 of this series that's going to be 1 week from now at the same time. So at 11 a.m. Eastern, I'm in Central, 10 a.m. Central. So depending on your time zone, you can plan accordingly. And really looking forward to seeing all of you here next week. And if you enjoyed it, feel free to share it with your network and be able to encourage other people to attend as well. So, but in the meantime, have a great rest of your day. Thanks so much.